Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. On this morning, I wanted to just talk about and summarize some of the latest news, as there are things happening, even though it is a little bit quiet and feels a bit slow around Manchester United after what appeared to be a flurry of activity in the first 5, 6, 7 days of the window, as United got Cunha done, pressed ahead on Mbeumo, and we're working on strikers and all sorts of things as well. But naturally, it has slowed down a little bit, and I want to address just where things are presently, as they are still moving, just a bit more slowly. Importantly, there is some things to discuss by way of outs and sales, where things are moving forward again, slowly, but progressively towards conclusions, and just where things are moving on that front as well. So first, I want to start with the striker situation, though. Obviously, this is the thing that is the most hotly debated. We'll get to Mbeumo at the end, but with everybody kind of knowing Mbeumo is our main guy, our main target, and our main person that we're gonna get, everybody's of course thinking, well, what comes next is the striker, the position we pretty much needed all the time, that we were focused on all summer, supposedly the top target, really since January, to get another striker in the door, a real number 9 to come in and lead the line, somebody that we can rely on. And so it is, of course, disconcerting that we're still, maybe as of today, on the verge of not really getting any of our major targets in that sense. And that's really where we're at. If I were to name the 4 players that I would say were the major targets for the striker position, it would have been Osimhen up through April or May, when they decided, all right, it's just the wages are just too much, we can't do it, and they haven't as of yet really considered bending on that unless he is going to change his mind in terms of wages. Then of course, Liam Delap as a 30 million opportunity on a release clause there. That is a good player, a good upgrade. Maybe not the be-all, end-all solution, 100% guaranteed, but a player at 30 million that represents a very good value, that's playing in the Premier League, and is probably almost certainly an upgrade on the present, and does allow you to spend some more money elsewhere, but it's good value considering you're getting Cunha and Mbeumo as well in the door, most likely. And then, of course, Victor Gyokeres, the more expensive option, essentially the scaled up version of Delap. I was just saying yesterday, I do find it kind of funny, all of the discourse, all of the love for Liam Delap, who has rejected United, by the way, just for any United fans out there. He rejected United, fully rejected United, and chose another club to join. But him and Gyokeres are really similar. Understandably, 2 players, I can see why the club would be targeting both of them. They're actually both very, very good at the same things, albeit Victor Gyokeres is, in for my money, from my view of watching him at Sporting and in Portugal, a much more, powerful version, a much more volume version of Liam Delap, but quite similar in a lot of ways. So I'm still surprised to this day how many people seemingly don't like him who really liked Delap, but it makes me wonder. That being said, Victor Gyokeres is not off. It's not off the table. In fact, as of today, I would lean towards him still being more likely than Ekitike, that I'll talk about in a second, because United are still very, very interested in him, and they remain on the table and hanging around the situation simply because it may be factual that Arsenal don't go for him in the end, that Benjamin Šeško becomes their major targets. You get a lot of back and forth each day, but from the Arsenal side and from England side, there seems to still be more reports that Benjamin Šeško is the main target that they want to go for, but that they're still working on both deals. I don't think United are too proud to be concerned about whether or not United was his first choice. They had to convince Mbeumo They had to convince Lenny Yoro last year. Hell, they had to convince Joshua Zirkzee, who was on his way to AC Milan at one point, and then they worked hard to try to steal him on that deal. So it's not particularly unusual. I still wonder why it came out so directly, all of that, but still, United hanging around it because he's a very good player that they really like, that they think if Arsenal drop out, then of course Sporting also lose a lot of leverage on the potential transfer, and that should make it an easier deal to get done too. So they're still there, and I would still say, from my standpoint, it's more likely than Ekitike as of now. But they're hanging around it for a lot of reasons. But the other major reason they're still hanging around it is that the lack of severe alternatives. We talked about Osimhen, talked about Delap. Ekitike being the main kind of other name that United have been linked with for some time, and that recently they have had contact to explore and understand the conditions of the deal. Now, my understanding is that the 100 million is the price. I understand there was a sort of a report yesterday. I personally think it was taken a bit too literally, or maybe without necessary kind of up-to-dateness on the situation. I think it was explaining, in a sense, that the player was rated at 60 million, which is correct going into the summer window. A lot of clubs were looking at Ekitike in the 70 to 80 million euros range, which is about 60 million pounds. But Frankfurt have upped their asking price to 100 million euros. Now, overnight, The Athletic put out an article, their deal sheet piece, and they covered the situation for United and specifically said as well that United are still remaining in the race for Gyokeres, but if, in case Arsenal don't make their move. But also, it spoke on Ekitike and did say that the price is 100 million euros. And this comes from their German correspondent, their Bundesliga correspondent, so the one who would know that the price is 100 million euros for Ekitike. He also tweeted out this morning, or I guess posted on X this morning, which I read, which was that from his information or his perspective, it's a pretty high chance Frankfurt don't have to even sell Ekitike this summer. They don't have to. They don't need to. They're not being forced into it, and hence why they're increasing the price so much. So it's a very complex deal in that sense. Obviously, way overvalued. From my information, the 100 million is the price, and United value him more like 60 million euros. And they would want to do a structured deal in that sense even still. So very, very far off. And then you have the competition from Chelsea and Liverpool. If the price were to come down into the 60, 70 million range, they would both be back in hard for him, I would assume, at that point in time. So a complicated one. United are checking on it. If they decide to make a move, if they decide to move it more concretely forward, to open negotiations or make offers, they haven't done so yet. They haven't gotten into that stage yet. They haven't made offers. They haven't opened talks yet. Some of it is being played up too far beyond the initial kind of just checks and asking, what the price would be, and, if the players agreed to go anywhere, and the basic things that are being done. Now, it should be stated that happens a lot. Sometimes it's reported, sometimes it isn't, but he is obviously a target if the price were to come down to a right range. That seems very unlikely. And so I think that this is a deal that at present looks extremely, extremely difficult. The price is just highly, highly prohibitive, barring a major shift from Frankfurt. But according to decent sources on that side, they don't really need to shift. They don't really need to drop their price. They don't really need to sell. They did sell Marmoush in January for 70 million euros. So, they're probably not really strapped for cash and are willing to continue and kind of sit on it. So that's kind of where we remain today. Beyond those two, you're really moving down the ladder where I think United are not going to rush into working on any other deals on the striker front until these are clarified, hence why they're sticking around the Gyokeres situation too. Because then you're talking about Mateta, who has been of interest but is unlikely to leave Palace and would be quite expensive. Then you're talking about looking at different options that we probably haven't even discussed, stop gaps or swap deals or things like that where there's other players involved. I don't think they'll make a move for someone like Vlahovic, who's on big wages and has somewhat faltered at Juventus, so we really don't know after that. I would say certainly you can keep an eye on someone like Gonzalo Ramos, maybe on a loan, maybe on a cheap deal, but that's later down the line. I don't think they would make a move for a player like that until maybe August if we can't get one of these guys. But I think much sooner than that, we will know for real if Arsenal are going for him for Gyokeres or Šeško, or if Ekitike's price is dropping, and we'll see where we go. So I don't think there is a concrete option beyond these two as of today. Beyond just keeping an eye on some of the things like Ramos, who's been offered, and such as well, though he doesn't really fit. He doesn't really fit in the same way that they do, though he's a good striker, but I would see him more as a platoon striker, someone you bring on in a game state where you have a lot of possession around the box and you need someone to sit in there and finish chances and all of that, which he is quite good at. So that is the situation with the strikers. It's a little bit of a wait and see. It's a little bit of a wait and see on Arsenal. It's a little bit of a wait and see. Does Gyokeres and his agent at some point just say, all right, we're not going to wait for Arsenal anymore. Let's do this. Does Gyokeres say, hey, agent, did you screw me here? Did you read the room wrong on this and think that Arsenal are coming in when they're not? And maybe push instead for him to go to United. We'll see. Does Frankfurt drop their price? Do we open talks and try to change things? That remains to be seen in that sense. But beyond that, I really don't know what they would do. Again, I would definitely keep Gonzalo Ramos in mind, but not as like a concrete thing today. Moving on to Onana, there's been a number of reports in the last few days that he's unlikely to leave this summer. Again, as I said before, they would like to have moved him. He was for sale at a certain, but the difficulty is, and always has been, the reality of moving him. One, in that he doesn't want to leave, and he's quite comfortable and settled in Manchester. Two, there's no real offers out there. So, the ones that would be out there would require pretty significant, probably financial cuts and things, and it would end up almost not making sense for United as well. So it sounds as though they've had discussions in the last few days, and they will just very likely keep him, and he will stay at the club next season. Again, United paid 60-something million for him. So, you take this amortization problem and you take the wages, and it just makes for a sale that isn't really possible unless a big one comes up from Saudi, which hasn't, and there hasn't really been anything real on that as of yet, and we don't know that there will be. There is still a plan to buy a keeper this summer, but as I've said quite a few times, the idea is more likely what they'll have to do is not go for a big major keeper, but get somebody like a young keeper, 20-25 million, who can compete with Onana and maybe become that guy this season, hopefully. And that would be kind of the plan. So Lamens, the other names that we talked about before, etc., right? As I said in a couple of recent videos, the Emi Martinez and Donnarumma stuff is a bit overplayed because we're not likely to sell Onana and we're not likely to buy another keeper like that of those costs without moving Onana on, because it's going to be too difficult. So think more again on the younger keeper sense, or I guess you could say someone like Vanya would be 20 million perhaps, but I would suggest that it's more likely to go for a younger one. A younger keeper that could develop into being the guy in the future is more likely in that sense. So still something on the radar for United to get done this summer is to address the keeper situation. There are sales that are moving, some surprisingly. It's interesting, the ones that end up moving and don't. First, talk about Jadon Sancho. There's been inquiries from Saudi, and there's also been, as of last night, some reports from Italy that Napoli are looking at Jadon Sancho. There's also obviously been talk of Dortmund and things like that. If they were to move Jamie Gittins, I think that would start to become a reality. But new reports out of Italy on Jadon Sancho for Napoli. Now, They're talking about Sancho. They're talking about Grealish. It seems like some of these clubs really want to get some of these, English players in. The ones that are out of favor, they've had a fair bit of success with them, which, fair play to them, and fair enough. I think that could be a good move. Again, the difficulty with Jadon Sancho will be 1 year left. He's going to have to probably get a payoff. So we'll need a bit of a fee. I can't see that much being offered from Italy, but we will need enough of a fee to at least cover what wages we might have to pay off, because it seems he's determined to get that pay. So we'll need whatever wages we have to cover that, and then that's it. So, I mean, maybe 10 million would do it, and it would benefit us, but more likely in the long term. But this is starting to move. There's starting to be a few more inquiries. On Antony, it's starting to move as well. Continued discussions with Real Betis, where they're starting to kind of line up what an offer would look like. Again, not expecting this to be quick, not expecting this to be done overnight, but there are things moving towards a potential deal here that works. And something like a loan with an obligation that they're mentioning, which is kind of wild, but a loan with an obligation where they buy half his rights and then half his rights the following year, really would work for United, but it is a complicated deal that will take some time to sort out and see what they can really offer. So we'll have to wait a bit on this, but it is moving and the talks continue, and Betis seem pretty determined to figure out a way to get him. So I think it's very, very likely he will go, and that that we'll get something done here. Now it remains to be seen if Leverkusen and Erik ten Hag come back in for him as well or not. And then there's Rasmus Hojlund, and there continues to be pretty strong talk in Italy. Once they wrap up Bonnie, who it seems like they're moving for first, maybe it's a little simpler deal, are going to continue to ramp up talks for Rasmus Hojlund. Now he may be considering wanting to stay, but once there are offers on the table, there will be new talks about that between him and the club and where things are at. His representative is definitely keeping an ear open for these other moves. So obviously, players want to play at the end of the day, and I do believe, I guess from Italy's side, they feel there's encouragement that if there's a deal there on the table, that something will happen and that he will move. So we're still going to have to wait on this. It's moving a little slow, but again, Hojlund to Inter, it seems like, is a distinct possibility. One of the other notes that I do want to make on sales is that, again, you take this situation with PSR, and we saw this last year where we had a big flurry of activity prior to the Club World Cup this year, for a lot of clubs trying to get in. Now it's very, very quiet, and I think what we're seeing a bit of is there's 2 weeks left until July, 2 weeks left until the financial year rolls over. We saw last year that it was a lot of the teams making the moves in the last 2 weeks of June were clubs trying to sell their players so that they could balance the books, so that they could improve their PSR position before the end of the year if they were tight on it. And they're trying to get those sales done and do little things and all of that to try to balance it. Well, we're likely seeing a bit of the same, and that's why it's a little slow. Clubs who want to make purchases are probably more likely to be delaying them until after July 1st, and instead working on sales if they have any tightness on their FFP or PSR situation, to just try to balance the books a bit more. It's not a big deal for us, but if clubs aren't under PSR pressure, then they're not in any rush to sell either. But if they are, then those clubs are working on the PSR side of things on selling. And so that makes our sales potentially a little more difficult if they want to minimize what they spend before July 1 and maybe maximize sales. Now, I don't know who this all applies to, but it's kind of like the market is a bunch of dominoes. You know what I mean? It's like a bunch of connected and moving parts. It's a living economy. So when if a bunch of clubs are not buying right now and are working on selling before July 1st, then that's going to affect and move the market. And so similar to last year, I think it'll ramp up after July 1st. We did see with United last season, we've already had a much quicker start, mind you. We've had more time to prepare, but we did see with last season kind of the same thing. After July 1, it was suddenly like bang, 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 deals and getting knocked down, left and right and moving forward. And that's what we should expect to see more of this year. So there's sales being moved forward, there's purchases being moved forward, and ideally then, you know, once the market gets moving a little bit, then things kind of will kick off a bit quicker and go more, once again, how we want them to. I'm not saying necessarily waiting everything for July 1st, but a little more bang, bang, bang in how it's going to move forward. So we'll see how that works at this point in time. We will see what happens, but they are moving and progressing on those transfers and those potential sales for sure. One that is not moving is Alejandro Garnacho right now. He turned down that move to Leverkusen, and I do want to discuss this situation, a bit, because as I've said many times, I think it's going to be rather difficult, and I think that Ruben Amorim said what he said about he'd be lucky to find a club to buy him at United's valuation, because he knows what the club knows and what I've heard, which is there just isn't this like big significant interest in him. There are clubs that are hanging kind of around it. Apparently, Aston Villa, Tottenham, Chelsea, but Chelsea are going for Gittins, they're going for Malik Fofana. They're doing pretty anything but buying Garnacho. If Garnacho has turned down these moves outside of England, which he has, and has prioritized moving within England, his options are diminishing by the day. And, Arsenal, maybe they'll come look at him again later, but they're looking at their striker, they're looking at Rodrigo, they're looking at other positions. Obviously, Zubamendi that they're finalizing. Like, they have other things that they're doing, and there's been no talk of it. Newcastle are chasing other targets. Tottenham, they're also right now, they're chasing Semenyo, they're chasing, they finalized Tell. I don't know that there's a world where they bring in Garnacho at this point and that they make that kind of move. Aston Villa will very likely be one of these clubs that has to wait until after July 1st and will be trying to raise some money before then. We'll see. And that's one that is intriguing to me. If the player was open to it, maybe he is. I don't know. But because, he might be. That one is a little intriguing to me, given that there are players at Aston Villa that I would take. Personally, I've said before, if we were to not be able to get Ekitike or Gyokeres and those deals weren't working out, I would absolutely 100% take a punt on Ollie Watkins. Not really a punt, because he's a pretty damn consistent player, but say, all right, well, if we can sell Garnacho to them for 50 million, purchase Watkins at a fair price, we get a lot of profit. We get a good senior striker in the door, and it doesn't block our spending because we still get that major profit while we're amortizing Watkins. So I'd be up for something like that. I say Watkins because I think he's a player they would sell. Obviously, there's others like Amadou Onana and such that you would be interested in if they were selling, but I'm not sure that they are. So that would be the challenge there. Obviously, yeah, that's the main difficulty. I mean, then there's also Emi Martinez, but I don't see United spending on Emi Martinez with Onana staying. I don't think he's the right type or anything. But regardless, we will have to see there. I do think, again, the reality that Garnacho and his people will have to face is there's not a ton of clubs in for him. Clubs are likely that do want to make offers and are probably going to make cut price offers because they know the situation. I think United will end up accepting a cut price offer at the end of the day, maybe 40 million, but it's just due to the situation. If he wasn't turning down deals from outside of England, then it would be a lot easier to sell him and get a decent price. But as it were, it just seems, unfortunately, like it's going to be a bit too difficult to move him on, given his preferences and all of that. And we're kind of in for it a little bit on this one. It's going to take some time. I would say on Rashford, obviously one might call that similar, that Barcelona are looking at Nico Williams and other targets. But I think the difference is I think Marcus Rashford would be willing to accept a lot of different clubs in Europe when push comes to shove. Even though Barcelona is his preference, I think there are plenty that would be interested in him. I also think, United could end up just putting him out on loan with maybe an option or an obligation or something like that too, where they'll definitely want to sell Garnacho up front more differently. So I think there's more options for Rashford, which will make it easier for something to happen at the end of the day. On Mbeumo, the situation is a little bit boring, okay? United are not in a rush. United are quite relaxed on the situation. They're confident that Bryan Mbeumo only wants Manchester United, that there isn't competition for him, that the whole Spurs noise was a big giant bluff and a red herring, which it was, and that they can kind of sit on this a little bit and ensure they get a fair price out of Brentford. The structure of the deal still needs to be right, but their feeling is the player only wants them. There's no competition, and Brentford have agreed with the player to sell. And players away on vacation, people are doing other shit right now, that sometime within the next week, hopefully to 10 days, that the discussions will have some kind of breakthrough and that they can, just get a deal done. At a price that's fair to them. This is why, kind of just tying into the point about Ekitike being unlikely, this is the main kind of thing here. They're really determined to be very, very disciplined on their pricing model, which is one, that they don't want to be paying more than 50 to 60 million for practically anybody. You look at some of the difficulties we're having in selling. We pay 72 million for Rasmus Hojlund. That means he's got 45 million after 2 years. And you take that Omar Barada kind of 2-year rule, where if it doesn't work out, you want to move him in 2 years. Well, hard to sell a player who's failed, who's got 45 million remaining in amortization. Same thing goes for like Onana at a similar price. Same problem with Antony. Same problem with all these deals we've done in the past, in addition to potentially wages being a factor. It's hard to sell them when that happens. So, with Cunha and Mbeumo, though, they're very unlikely to flop because they're Premier League players. They still want to remain disciplined on that. They buy them for, 55 million. Then after a few seasons, they're down at 30. Well, if you take a player like Cunha or Mbeumo who've done it in the Premier League, and then 2 years down the line, you try to sell them for 30, you can. People will, even if they didn't have the best time at United, many clubs will still pay for them at that point because they're more proven and that the price isn't that high. And it's the same thing goes for a younger player like Ekitike, and to be fair, Gyokeres as well. That's why I said I think that they'd be looking at something more like the Bruno deal, where ideally it's got add-ons and structures and the same thing, where they'd only want to pay a base of 55 million in pounds, so that after 2 years, you're still only at 30, and someone would probably take a punt on a player at that point in time. So the price has to be realistic, and on Mbeumo, they want to be very disciplined with that. They want to be very disciplined with any of these. So when the prices are way out of whack, it just makes it very unlikely, because they're not going to break the bank for players that, that they value at a significantly lower than the margins. So on Mbeumo, again, I don't think it's that far away, but the fact of the matter is they don't want to go pay 65 million up front given the situation. Again, the other thing working in their factor is there's only a year left on the contract. So, in all of these things, they do think it's more fair that a 50, 55 plus add-ons to reach the 60 million mark is more reasonable, and we'll see where we end up at the end of the day with it. I do believe they've discussed, when there was that talk of like a second bid, they discussed something that was more like maybe 50 plus 12 or something, but Brentford said no, and so, they didn't really submit it and make a bid, and so they're kind of back to the drawing board on figuring that out, but they probably felt that was more than fair, and things have been a little bit slow since then. So, I'm still very confident this happens. I think everybody involved is still confident it happens, but there is a point where somebody's going to have to bend on this a little bit and get it done. But United are pretty solidly determined to stick to their guns in the direction that they are going, and all of that. Okay, that's what I have for today's video. Probably be live or do something later if there's anything else new that I can share that comes up. What I do know is that United are kind of calm about the speed of things. Players returning in 3 weeks or so. They're progressing these sales slowly forward. They're calm on Mbeumo. They're confident they'll be able to get a deal over the line and in time for training and things like that as well. But they are kind of relaxed on the situation. It isn't like vital that everything is done in the next couple of days. And they're prepared to wait a bit as well on the striker situation to let things shake out and make sure that they get a player that they want. Don't rush into anything stupid, but also don't walk away from potentially good deals where they could get players that they do like in Gyokeres or Ekitike if the price comes way down. So they don't want to walk away from those either. and all of that. So they're operating at a calm, reasonable level. We've got Cunha done. We've got most of Mbeumo done. We're still way ahead of where we've been in most summers, and it could very easily, on a dime, be Mbeumo in, Arsenal drop out for Gyokeres, and we have a striker as well, and a couple sales kick in, and that could all happen in a matter of a couple of days. So it's not like we're far off. They've been really good at getting a lot of deals kind of up to the point where they can knock them down quickly. We just need something to shake things loose a little bit here and sort it out. But sales have been a big thing they've been working on the last 7 to 10 days to, make sure they're discussing with the players what's going on, make sure those players are seeking out those moves and inquiries and bringing them to the club. And so that's what we're kind of seeing with like the Sancho and the Antony and all of that as well. Okay, that's what I've got for today's video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a good one.